Your problem is that you don't know anything about poker and you don't understand anything. This episode will be a little different. Instead of sharing a poker session like I normally do, I will be focusing on mainly one hand. This hand is a hand that I vlogged and went through in the previous episode. It really wasn't that interesting, or so I thought. Not a big pot, but it did prompt a very colorful comment from a viewer who disagreed with how I played and my thought process so much that I guess he felt the need to kind of attack me with an awesome comment nonetheless. And I think it's a good example hand to talk about something you guys might be interested in, an in-depth look at value betting, finding the right price, and EV in bet sizings. This episode will have three main parts. First part, I will be going over the viewer comment about my hand, which I think is a good segue into the second part, where I'll be talking about what it means to value bet for the right price and how to find the right price, using my hand as an example. In the third part, I will go over how a solver will play that hand. And yeah, if we want to go by the solver as the benchmark correct answer, let's see who's closer to being correct, right, between me and that viewer. Just a warning, parts 2 and 3 really get into the nerdy math / technical territory. I promise this is not that kind of channel normally. Before jumping into it, I'm going to spend around 20 seconds to go through the hand in question so you guys have context. If you want to see it play out with some of my brief thought process, you can check out the previous episode. Here's the hand. I'm under the gun with pocket tens, one heart. There's a button straddle to $6. The blinds fold. I raise it to $15. Everyone folds except for the button / straddler. Heads up, flop comes deuce deuce 8 with 2 hearts. I bet $10. Villain calls. Turn is a deuce. I bet $20. Villain calls. River is the 7 of hearts. I bet $60. Villain folds. That's the end of the hand. Okay, now let's look at the comment. Commenter's name, by the way, is I beat GTO. So yeah, the name already is a bit telling what we're in for. I actually already did respond to him in the comment section, but the comment is just so good, it deserves a closer look. Okay, before I actually go into it, I will say this. I'm actually quite used to this kind of thing. Even in live poker, as some of you may know, we see this occasionally. There'll be those players that like to call out other players, sometimes calling me out. Hey, you should have played this hand this way. You shouldn't have played it that way, or some kind of variation of that. And oftentimes that person is so wrong with his logic. Anyways, between live poker, online messages, emails, or YouTube comments that I receive telling me how wrong I was in certain spots, I usually just don't care that much. Yeah, I don't care about being right or being perceived as being right. In live poker, my go-to response usually is just nodding in agreement. I'd be like, yeah, man, you're right. You just got so unlucky that hand. Just keeping it real with you guys. Okay, yeah, I don't care too much about being perceived as right or wrong, and I really don't care about educating the person who is wrong when that's the case. And I know that makes me kind of shitty, but just really want to keep it real with you guys. All right. But lately, I found that I am starting to care more and more about my viewers here. Some of you I've met, some of you have sent me like some very supportive messages, and I'm happy to grow the poker community, like however small of a role of a part that I'm contributing to that. I am happy with doing it. So when there's a comment like the one from Mr. IBGTO, which normally I wouldn't really care about, I don't want some of my viewers reading that comment to be misguided. So yeah, let's get back to it. Okay. Your problem is that you don't know anything about poker and you don't understand anything. Okay, so yeah, right out the gate, the first sentence of his comment, that's what he says, tells me what my problem is. So yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong about that statement. It's his opinion. Everyone's entitled to one. But apparently, poker is the pinnacle of world knowledge. If you don't know poker, you don't understand anything, period. And then he goes on to say, A, 2 overcards like ace-jack off without a backdoor draw have 24% versus pocket tens on the flop. Everyone who plays poker for more than 2 weeks knows that every out on the flop is about 4%. Okay, so let's break that up. He's talking about my hand. In the first part, he's saying that if the villain had 2 overcards against my pocket tens, he'd have 24% equity on the flop. So yeah, it's a statement of fact. It's math that he's not wrong about. But I think he's stating it here because he thinks he's correcting me on a previous comment I made where I wasn't even talking to him and I was talking about equity on the turn. Okay, anyways, he goes on. Everyone, all caps, who plays poker for more than 2 weeks knows that every out on the flop is about 4%. A little presumptuous, don't you think? I don't know if I agree with that. Actually, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but when I first started playing poker in just a couple weeks, I didn't know that or wasn't thinking about that. And I am very certain that if I go sit down at a poker table, smaller or bigger stakes, and I ask that question to everyone, most of them won't know that. And these players have been playing for years. I mean, if I did ask, they can eventually figure it out. It's basic math and probabilities, but they don't know it off the top of their head. I mean, I might be wrong, but from that statement, I just feel like this guy is really young and has very little, if any, live poker experience. Okay, he goes on. B, a smaller pair has about 8%, and therefore... Okay, so true. Smaller pair against my pocket tens would have 2 outs, and each out on the flop is 4%, which totals 8%. So yeah, another mathematical statement of fact that before he gets to the point he's trying to make. Okay, so C, you want to bet bigger when hands with almost no equity call, while hands with a lot of equity fold! Exclamation mark. Okay. I read this sentence a few times over. I know there must be a point he's trying to make, but okay, let's break the sentence into 2 parts. You want to bet bigger when hands with almost no equity call. This is pretty much a no shit Sherlock kind of statement, right? Yeah, if players call big bets with almost no equity at all, then sure, you want to bet big. But that's just not what happens in reality now, is it? Like, please tell me what games you are playing in that players are calling big bets when they're drawing dead. Even the biggest whales or VIPs that I know, they're not getting their money in dead or with almost no equity. They like to gamble with some equity, usually not for the right price, right? Which is what makes them VIPs, but they like the thrill. Anyways, you listed a fantasy scenario. Cool. Same thing about the second part of the sentence. Hands with a lot of equity are usually not folding, right? So I don't really know what you're trying to say, but either way, it doesn't apply to this hand. In this hand, like the hand that we're talking about, like what high equity hand that loses to me would I want to fold? I'm looking for calls here for value. The only hands I want to fold out are hands that beat me, which would be a bluff. And that's obviously like not the case here. Hands that beat me are never folding. So a little bit lost here. Okay. D. You want to bet bigger on the flop with value hands because the pots grows exponential, and with more money in the pot, you get more calls on the river. Now, this sentence, there are parts I can get behind. When you have value hands, you want pots to grow. I think no one will disagree with that. But one thing that a lot of people forget is pots don't magically grow when you bet big. Pots only grow when a bet gets called. So if your aim is to grow a pot, you can't just blindly bet big. What you actually need to do is think, assess, and figure out what the maximum price is you can bet that would get a call. If you have a value hand and bet too big and end up folding out a worse hand, then you just killed all your value and you didn't grow the pot at all. So no, growing a pot is not always about betting big, especially in the case of our hand, right, that we're talking about. Okay. Think about betting 60 into 80 on the river because you bet small on the flop, or betting 60 into 140 because you bet bigger on the flop and therefore also on the turn. Which of these two bets gets called more often? Okay, so the answer to your question is, if the villain has 2 overcards that missed on the river, he's not calling either way. But I'll tell you which play would have gotten me extra value from previous streets if he did have 2 overcards. It would be from betting small. Okay. All right. And then start learning poker. All caps. Exclamation mark. Well, I started a long time ago and never stopped. Still learning. So thank you. Okay, now let's get into part 2. Finding the right price when value betting. Mr. I beat GTO is implying that I botched my value here. So let's take a closer look and see if that's the case. Some discretion. This is an oversimplified example, and I'll be referring to EV only in terms of the pot and bet sizings. And this hand is straightforward enough to illustrate that. I'm not factoring in concepts like implied odds, reverse implied odds, fold equity, only straight EV from value bets. In my hand, pocket tens, we're going to go with the assumption that the villain had 2 overcards. We actually don't know that. It was never revealed. But as played, that's what it seems like he had. And I'll also explain later why it's fine to go with that for this example. Okay, looking back at I beat GTO's comment, he mentioned that 2 overcards has 24% equity on the flop. True. So then what is the quote-unquote correct price to bet for value? A common misconception is that since the villain has 24% equity, a hand that could win 1 out of 4 times, him paying 1/4 of the pot to see the next card is a fair price for him. So if I make a bet that makes him pay more than 1/4 of the pot to win the pot, then it's a good value bet. More expected value for me and less for him. Positive EV for me and negative EV for him. The more I make him pay, the better value for me, but only to the point that he doesn't fold. Because if he does, we get 0 value. Okay, this is not entirely correct. The 24% equity refers to flop all the way to the river. So this concept is only true if there's no more action. So if it were all in, or if the turn goes check, check, and the river goes check, check, then yes, what I just described is fine. But as we know, that's not how poker works. This was obviously not an all-in hand, all-in pot, and a bit silly to assume like no future action, right? So if you really want to find the baseline correct or positive EV bet for this street, you need to calculate his equity for this street only. And that is actually as easy as counting outs. If the villain has 2 overcards, he has 6 outs. We have 47 unknown cards. 6 out of 47 is 12.7%. So as long as I lay a price for him to pay more than 12.7% of the pot, it's a bad price for him and a good price for me. And then when the turn card comes, we reevaluate. Okay, so we know that I bet $10 on the flop. Let's find out if it was positive EV or negative EV. This is a part where many people often get wrong as well, how to calculate the pot odds. So the pot was $34 on the flop. Once I bet $10, that is added to the pot, making it $44. If the villain calls, his $10 is also added on, making it $54. So he would be paying $10 to potentially be in the lead to win $54. We're going street by street. 10 out of 54 is 18.5%, which is more than 12.7%, right? So actually it's like 50% more than that. So I am making him pay a price more expensive than what is fair for him. So that's positive EV for me. When the turn comes a deuce, I bet $20. Let's go through the same math to see if this bet was positive EV or not. On the turn, he now has 7 outs. His outs increased from 6 to 7 because a 4th deuce can counterfeit me now if he has 2 overcards. We also have 1 less unknown card now. So his equity on the turn is 7 out of 46, which equals 15.2%. 15.2% is the baseline. Any bet that makes him pay more than 15.2% of the pot to win the pot is positive EV. I am laying a price for him to pay $20 to potentially win $94. 20 out of 94 is 21.2%. I'm still making him pay more than he should. So that's good value for me. Positive EV for me and negative EV for him. Now, some of you might be asking, what if he had a stronger hand like 8x or pocket pair? Don't you need to bet bigger to protect against those? So understand this. 8x or weaker pocket pairs have even less equity with only 2 outs. So these bet sizes would be of even higher value for me. Out of the hands that lose to me, the highest equity hand that the villain could have on the turn is 2 overcards with 7 outs. So the bets I made were positive EV and cover even the highest equity hand possible that the villain can have. Now you may say, if he did have 8x or pocket pair, he would think he has more showdown value and would have called bigger bets. So could I have missed value by not betting bigger? Maybe, and this is where the strategic aspect comes into play, like always debatable. I don't know if he has 8x, right? If he has 8x or pocket pair. But all of these are among the range that I'm targeting. I'm targeting all the hands that lose to me, right? 8x, pocket pair, all the way up to 2 over cards. I don't want any of these to fold. I know betting bigger could risk folding out like 2 over cards or some weak pairs. And I was also confident that 8x or medium pocket pair would pay me off a bigger bet on the river. So for this board, I chose a strategy that squeezes the maximum value from his weakest perceived holding on the flop and turn, and going for thicker value on the river if he had a showdown hand. And I think it went as well as it could because my big bet, $60 on the river, did not get called. So it doesn't seem like he had showdown value. Now let's move on to part 3. Compare how a solver would play this hand. So yeah, I ran a solve with this hand. Let's review it. Okay, so pre-flop, pocket tens. I raised. You'll see here, solver says, under the gun with pocket tens, you should always raise. Red means raise, blue means fold. So pretty standard. I opened with pocket tens and it was correct. I think no surprises here. All right, on the flop of deuce deuce 8, I bet small. Mr. I beat GTO is saying I should bet big. Solver says I should check here. Green is for check. Yeah. So, okay. One thing I want to say about solvers is it tells you what the mathematically optimal play is, but it actually doesn't tell you why. Like why you should do this. It's up to interpretation by the user. And sometimes it's obvious, sometimes not so much, which is where I think the value of coaching comes in. But okay, let's not get into that. Solver is saying check. I'm assuming to trap the villain. This flop is never good for an under the gun open, so I guess the solver assesses that checking would induce a bet from the villain. This is value. I'll tell you why I never check here. This is one of the first adjustments I make in these games, the 1-3 games in my area. They are passive, somewhat tight, and under-bluffed. Something that the solver doesn't account for. In a game that's passive and players don't bluff nearly as much as they should, checking to trap for value is just a big no. I've mentioned before in previous episodes that how you deviate and adjust to the game you're playing in is way more important. And I stand by that. This is a deviation that I make, but it's definitely very conscious and intentional. Hence, I bet small for value. Oh, and by the way, Mr. I beat GTO, c-betting small consistently is a strategic line that I take at these stakes. Serves a lot of functions. I like keeping my bluffs cheap. Thin value gets paid. Thick value can induce raises. Okay, not going to get into that. Can't give everything away, right? Now, the turn is a deuce, and I bet small again. Mr. I beat GTO is saying I need to bet bigger. Solver says I should check again, or I should almost always check. This is pretty interesting. Solver is just assessing that this spot is so good for the villain to take a stab. I should just always check. But I'm telling you, players here at these stakes, not bluffing this spot if check to them. But let's take a look at the expanded options. Pocket tens with a heart. Now it does say I should check 93% of the time, but 3% of the time I should bet small, and 3% of the time I should bet even smaller. So yeah, it says here 3% of the time I should bet 5.4 big blinds, which is like $16. I ended up betting $20. Anyways, betting big is just not a thing. On the river, it's the 7 of hearts. I bet $60. That's a big bet. Solver says, okay, this is pretty interesting. I'll show you guys what I see here. Pocket tens with a heart is what I have. And with that hand, Solver says I should check or bet small. And it's really close. 44% of the time I should check, and 55% of the time I should bet really small. I think this tiny bet is because, as played, the solver assesses that the villain just has 2 overcards, and if I bet small, tiny, he could call with ace high, I guess. If I had pocket tens without a heart, solver says I should just always bet small. Because I guess with the flush possibility and unblocking it, flush is always calling and not bluffing. You guys know why I went for the big bet, mostly hoping to get called by 8x. But solver says that's not the play. I guess 8x is just too unlikely, perhaps, according to the solver. My thinking would be there are a lot of 8x combos in the villain's range. 8-9, 8-7, 8-10. I know I have pocket 10s and there's a 7 on the board, but those combos are still out there. Ace-8, King-8 suited. Or maybe the solver thinks even 8x should fold to a big bet, or would fold, because my third barrel is so strong. So betting small is always the best play. So this is an example of a spot where I would always rather go with my own exploitative plays than the solver's optimal play. I just think I know like these specific game types better. I don't think the players are aggressive enough to bluff. That's why I don't check to them. And I don't think they'd be good enough to fold 8x on the river. Okay, that's it for this episode. Next episode, I promise, back to normal. I'll be sharing a poker session. Hope that some of you may have enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.